This review and analysis of Star Trek Picard Episode 9 Et in Arcadia Ego Part 1 contains full spoilers. The playlist for my other Picard videos is linked in the description. The first thing I noticed was this episode is back to a 45-minute runtime, which was cause for optimism considering how drawn out the last three have felt. If any episode of something is extended, it's usually the finale, so that's not the case here gave me hope that we would be in for something more pacey and slick than we've been used to from this show. There's no flashback this week, as post-recap we are right where we left off as La Sirena goes through and exits the transwarp conduit right above the synth planet. Jurati stumbles out of her quarters to ask about Deep Space 12 and whether she's still under arrest, frustratingly reminding us that we're not going to be shot of her yet. And Soji's highly selective memory tells us that the planet is called Coppelius by the synths. I've been noting along the way how generally dismal the sci-fi names have been in this show, but I can't really knock that one, it's quite nice. Shortly after, the ship's red alert lights and the sirens start going, because a Romulan ship followed them through the conduit. This is the first we've seen of this automatic red alert, even though La Sirena was in combat at the end of episode 4, so maybe Rios had replaced the bulb in the meantime, and it's like Christmas tree lights, when one bulb's gone none of it works. Jurati of course drank acid to make the tracking go away, so Soji says the Romulan ship must have extrapolated where they'd be going from their last known course and position anyway. Now the place they were going when they shook him off previously was Nepenthe, so even if he had done that somehow, that trail should have ended there, because obviously after that they set a new course. Besides that, why would he want to wait until now to attack if he thought he could take them? He didn't need to follow them to the planet to find out where it is. The Romulan fleet is already on course for it anyway. Presumably he's attacking because he's figured out they've picked Soji up, as killing Simps is his goal. So putting it off until now pointlessly risked his mission and left open the window of opportunity for them to warn the Simps of what's coming. After a bit of dogfighting, including some jiggery pokery with Narek's cloaking device which didn't make much sense to me, the artifact pops out of the transwarp aperture, making it a sort of reunion of almost all the ships we've seen in the show. No one seems worried that it might be the actual Borg themselves showing up, even though they've just had a joyride in their network, which maybe tells us something about the current state of the collective. Unexpectedly, some big space flowers pop up, and one grabs La Sirena to drag it down to the planet, while several others tackle the artifact. I have to give them some credit for this. I didn't expect giant space orchids. Whether it's a triumph for visual over logic depends on the details, and we don't really get any, but it is something new at least. I of course wrote space flowers in my notes, even though that's a bit silly sounding because that's what it is, but later Raffi literally calls it a space flower. Putting space in front of something's name is meant to be a callback to science fiction B-movies of the 1950s. You're not actually meant to do it for real. Picard starts saying words like his mind's been hijacked. With his eyes closed he says, "Thank you for coming everyone." I thought he was being used to channel some intelligence from the planet, but it's actually meant to be because of his brain trouble. Post-titles he wakes up on the sickbay bio bed with Jurati stood over him. He's less worried about this than I would be, considering she's the confirmed murderer of the crew. She's sad though because she's scanned him and found his parietal lobe defect, so he breaks it to the crew that he has this, but also tells them not to mention it again. He also reveals what the point of coming here was for him, which is that he is going to return Soji to her fellow Simps and warn them of the coming Romulan attack. What his plan was before it turned out Soji could get into the Borg transwarp network, I don't know. The time frame would have been much narrower at best. Raffi estimates this 15-minute transwarp journey has got them there a day or two ahead of the Romulans, but before that the Romulans had a solid head start, so Picard's original plan would probably have got them immediately destroyed on arrival. Upon leaving the ship, they see some smoke pillars in the far distance, which they guess must be the artifact crash site. Considering a Borg cube is over 3 kilometers cubed and none of it is actually visible from where they are, it would seem like a sure bet that either it's in many pieces or crushed like a tin can and anyone aboard would have been killed. Combine that with the scale of the wreckage it ought to produce and the huge distance between them and it, then to go and search it for Elnor when the Romulans could be as little as a day away is to pretty much give up on their actual purpose for being there. When Raffi points out the odds of survivors anyway in it are low, Picard says hope and the odds make poor bedfellows, which is so meaningless a pseudo-aphorism that I'd challenge anyone to come up with worse. Despite the Borg cube not being visible, when they get to it, having covered a distance that certainly looks like the best part of a day's hike to me, the section we see appears intact, as does the inside when they stroll in. There's no searching either on this 28 cubic kilometre ship. They walk right in and there's some XBs milling around right there, and Elnor and Seven meet them. Considering the consoles on the artifact aren't on the wall or ceiling, and that neither Elnor, Seven nor any of the XBs seem to have sustained any serious injuries from the crash, they landed the right way up as well. While there, Rios and Raffi get the long-range sensors up and running and detect that it's 218 warbirds on the way. Not a bad force for a power whose main world was annihilated and whose people seem to be spread across the galaxy in shanty towns like we saw in Absolute Candor. For contrast, the Federation had 40 ships at Wolf 359 and the combined Obsidian Order and Tau Shiar fleet sent to destroy the Founder's homeworld in the Amarian Nebula numbered 20 ships. They were confronted with a Jem'Hadar fleet of 150 ships, which was treated as an unthinkably vast number and was a pre-planned trap by the full-strength Dominion. After making sure Elnor's okay, Picard says his goodbyes to him as Elnor is left behind to help get the cube's defensive systems back up and protect the XBs. When Elnor says it might be the last time they say goodbye, Picard offers us another bit of stunning homespun wisdom as he says that's true of any two people who are saying goodbye. If the episode wanted to convince me of the severity of Picard's brain abnormality, then job done. If he makes it back to Chateau Picard, I expect he'll start putting up those tacky decorations that say live, laugh, love all over the place. The next we see, Picard, Rios, Raffi, Jurati and Soji are stood looking down at Synth Town, which we were expressly told was the opposite direction from the artifact, and it's still daylight. Now, I'm no expert on figuring out distances and planetary curvature, though we are told this world is smaller than Earth, perhaps to try to make all of this work. But for a 3 kilometre tall object to be invisible in the distance suggests quite a long hike to it, exacerbated by how we actually see shots of them cover some hilly terrain as well. When they've got to it, found who they were looking for in that enormous structure and done other stuff there, got back and travelled an unknown distance in the other direction to find this place, and it's still light outside. It's easier to forgive when we see them go between planets in ships in Star Trek because we're seldom given the distances and speeds involved all the time, but here we see big shots of distance, know the size of this cube and know that they have 2 days max before the Romulans get there. It was unclear in the one shot that we got when they arrived at it, but we briefly see later in the episode that the artifact was partially submerged in a body of water conveniently right next to land, and also conveniently still flat. While the space flowers couldn't bring it in perfectly, they did a heck of a job then, and what's more, anything that large coming in hot would have caused vast destruction. The cube would be somewhere between a fifth and a third of the size of the asteroid, theorised to have seen off the dinosaurs, but this planet is smaller than Earth as well, so everyone's fortunate the space flowers weren't too overwhelmed. Water approximately covered up to a third of the cube maybe, which might help the being unable to see it issue from earlier, but adds extra trouble as to how they got aboard it. If, like me, you were curious as to how a colony of androids would live then, well, they look much like any other alien race we've seen in the Star Trek shows when they beam down to a moderately advanced planet. People in floaty clothes milling around wearing some low effort design jewellery, and a couple of guys sat playing 3D chess or an equivalent. A lot of the men lack shirts to show their perhaps literally sculpted physiques as well. The only difference between these people and any other Next Generation or Voyager Planet of the Week is that these are a lot more racially diverse. And if you wondered what the offspring of Lieutenant Commander Data would be like, the answer is unremarkable and a bit annoying in a fake New Age sort of way. The first one they talk to starts touching the lines on Picard's old face and listing a load of characteristics and feelings, like she sells crystals to enhance tarot readings or something. Even post-emotion chip Data didn't quite get the point of physically touching the Phoenix in First Contact after trying to emulate Picard doing it. Now touching things and yammering on about feelings seems to be their first impulse. The same synth lady asks Soji if her mission was complete, and Soji tells her yes, but also that the fleet of Romulan warbirds is coming. As they wouldn't be coming were it not for Soji being out in the field in the first place to have her dreams probed by Narek. It's a funny definition of a successful mission they're using, but that's what they call it. Let's not forget what the mission was. Maddox said he sent Dahj and Soji out into the wider galaxy to find out about the anti-synth Romulans and the anti-synth Federation involvement. Well, they've done that, but they also led the might of the Romulan Navy to the synth colony's doorstep in the process, so it's only a win on a technicality so far as I'm concerned. Come to think of it, if Maddox sent Dahj and Soji out to find out who the Zhat Vash are, why did he wipe their minds so they thought they were ordinary humans? The obvious point with this is that if you're going to send people on a mission, then it's a good idea for them to know who they actually are and that they're on one. But that aside, Soji knowing who she was would have prevented her trusting Narek in the first place and leading things to the situation they're in now. The only reason I can think of for Dahj and Soji to have no idea who they actually were is that despite being mind-bendingly stupid, it was required for the plot to happen. Anyway, before the hippie commune stuff gets too insufferable, up pops Brent Spiner. He's not an android, but rather Dr. Noonien Soong's son Altan, who we never knew he had. He tries to paper over some of the questions raised just now by saying Maddox had a deceptive and devious side, not a moronic and kamikaze side, because we still need to hold on to the fact that he accomplished something in a couple of years that Jurati said would take 1,000. So we just have to chalk it up to him being overly sneaky. We're also introduced to Sutra, who is Jana's twin, and also conveniently has read up a lot on Vulcan stuff, to the point she knows how to do a mind meld to get the Admonition vision from Jurati to see what's going on with that. We see the whole montage, which is flashy and interesting. The entire thing seems to state that when simps get too powerful, their creators in fear will seek to destroy them, bringing about destruction, and at that time simps will be able to call on the makers of the Admonition, who are a race of super simps from beyond our galaxy, to help out. All of this has come from O through Jurati to get here, so either her mind's not capable of comprehending the whole thing, or O actually psychotically wants the destruction of everything, because the vision warns that the unnamed Admonition creators will come to save the simps, and that's the destruction it warns of. By devoting herself and the Zhat Vash then to wiping out simps, she's bringing about what she was trying to avoid. As Narissa too immediately shared O's understanding of the need for action upon receiving the vision, it can't be that O herself is a psycho, it's clearly that the message isn't transmitting itself properly to the people who hook into it. Maybe that's why most people start killing themselves if they get a bit of the vision, because there's nothing in there that should be causing that otherwise, it's just making them go mad because it's broken. The message anyone should derive from it is you'd better not kill simps, and instead O and Narissa heard you absolutely have to kill simps. The implication is that Sutra's been able to unscramble the thing because she's a synth and the message is actually for them. And no matter who built them and how and why, one synth is pretty much like another at a certain level of advancement, and so she's compatible. The makers of the lightsaber fence then made a vision which is garbled so badly for most of the potential recipients who might actually touch the thing, which is to say organic people, that it brings about the thing the prophecy warns about. Soji's solution in conversation with Sutra is that Rios will get La Sirena up and running. No thanks of course to the space flowers for damaging their potential means of escape on that one, and everyone can hop on and they'll get out of there rather than get blasted to smithereens by the approaching Romulans. Sutra's counter is that this is running and hiding and only postponing the inevitable time when the Romulans next track them down. which may be true, except it ignores the vastly different circumstances that would result. For a start, they can blow the whistle on Commodore O and get their threat in the Federation sorted, so they'll have the protection of the might of Starfleet. Not to mention Picard already has a squadron ready and waiting for him at Deep Space 12. It seemed at this point that Sutra had been programmed with the playground rules of conflict, which is that it's better to get your lunch money robbed and head flushed down the toilet than to lose face by running away. Narek's ship was also brought down by a space flower, and so he's captured. Special mention has to go to the scene where he's dragged up to the village and Sutra remarks, "Look what the cat dragged in," only for it to then cut to Jurati with a cat. That's a level of truly awful that actually takes some nerve. The cat is called Spot 2 and is also a robot, though I thought Data had got through more than one Spot in his time. We first see Spot in the Next Generation episode Data's Day, and lastly in Star Trek Nemesis, which is a gap of more than a decade, but it could conceivably have been the same kitty all along, considering how heartwarming it is when Data finds Spot in the Enterprise D wreckage at the end of Generations. Actually, I'm happy to believe that there was just one Spot the whole time. I'll go with that. We learn that Sutra's real agenda is to summon the Simps who made the Admonition to wipe out all organic life, as she believes they'll never be safe with non-Simps, and so it's worth exterminating however many trillions for the sake of seemingly a few dozen. She aids Narek's escape for as yet unknown reasons, and the ditzy hippie crystals android is stabbed through the eye and killed with her own brooch in the process, though who did it we don't know for sure. Narek's the one who appeared to notice the brooch, but I'm leaning toward it being Sutra because it allows her to point out how deadly the organics are proving to be for the Simps. What stood out to me is that the dead one's body was laid out in front of everyone with the bluebird ornament still sticking out of her head. Altan soon, somewhat improbably, sides with Operation Annihilate All Organic Life, even though he himself is organic. You could say there are shades of the earliest Soong we've seen in the shows, that being Arik Soong in Enterprise and his devotion to saving the genetically modified augments left over from the eugenics wars. They share that they call their respective groups their children, but Arik's commitment wasn't going to result in the death of every living thing. Altan concurs with the argument that the Federation won't really be any better than the Romulans, as they, after all, banned synths just for the small infraction of synths being hacked and destroying the Mars complex, plus thousands of ships and 92,000 people. A ban which doesn't half look reasonable at this point. Picard could point to the fact that the Federation gave him a squadron to help him protect the Simps when he explained the situation to them, but as that is a watertight bit of reasoning, he of course doesn't. He's placed under house arrest then, while Jurati insists she shouldn't be, and Soong affirms he could use her help for some reason. He told her earlier about his trying to build a way of transferring his mind into an android body. The urgency of the project, to which he referred at the time, seemed to be about his being an old guy whose years are numbered, but maybe he wants to hop into his new robot body before the super simps come to wipe out all organics. How much help Jurati can feasibly be to him is debatable. She's the one who thought flesh and blood androids were 1,000 years away, and they've been making those here for a decade and a half. Still, she's in place for what I expect will be her redemption arc over the whole murdering Maddox thing. The stage is set then for the arrival of the Deus Ex Machina Simps, who have never been seen or mentioned in the whole of Star Trek before now, but are so powerful that as soon as a synth radios them, they'll come to wipe out all organic life. Soong essentially said that they're an intergalactic power, which, if we exclude omnipotent beings like Q, puts them beyond anyone else we've ever seen in terms of power, except possibly Species 8472 and the Sphere Builders. But you'd think that if they're leaving neon lights with encoded messages around, that they can't have left no other traces on this galaxy. If their job is to wipe out organic life when they get the call, it seems they limit it to a galaxy by galaxy basis. As synthetic life originates from creation by organic life, maybe they only do their mass exterminations by the galaxy, but leave their glowing pipe relics behind in each one to be found by synth life, so once it does arise and they face danger, the super simps can show up to do their genocide. In the original series episode I, Mud's androids originated from the Andromeda galaxy, and their creators have been destroyed by a supernova, leaving them behind. What's more, the Kelvins, in By Any Other Name, left Andromeda because of dangerously rising radiation in that whole galaxy, which one might guess leaves it uninhabitable to all organic life. Neither of these things really matches up too well, but it's something perhaps. It can't be then that the Admonition's warning and recording of events 200,000 years ago happened in the Milky Way galaxy, because there would be no organic life left now, so either they've been misinterpreted or it rules out all the theories of a Borg connection. It seems to me this super synth race leave entire galaxies as incubators for organic life until simps are constructed and come cooling. Of course, just leaving a glowing climbing frame on some planet for someone to find isn't much of a calling card. For one thing, it relies on persecuted simps finding and connecting with it rather than organics, the latter of which is miles more likely. In fact, it's only because of the good luck that Sutra had read up before this on how to do a Vulcan mind meld that the message got passed on at all. It can't be that it's a feature rather than a bug, that there's intention in it giving a message to organics that simps need to be destroyed so that they can come and kill the organics and save their synth brothers and sisters. That will set destructive events in motion, but without simps contacting the super simps, which they can only do through experiencing the admonition themselves, and which only happened here by massive coincidence. Instead, it would just hasten simps getting wiped out, which is what super simps don't want. Besides which, wasn't the admonition supposedly left by the former civilization of that planet? This show is far off having answered all its questions. We've always had this question of just how androidy these androids are and how deep their being made of flesh and blood goes. Even the gold-skinned and gold-eyed one who got killed in this episode bled from the eye, so it seems they all share the level of being flesh and blood that Daj and Soji have, which raises the question of why flesh and blood nearly people also have data-like pigmentation. It's never been clear whether Daj and Soji are entirely flesh and blood. I personally pictured it not being 100% because otherwise what's left that makes them an android and not a 3D printed human? And it also explains how they gain super strength, speed and tactical reasoning upon activation. If they are all flesh and blood, then they may be technically synthetic, which may be why this word has entered the lexicon here over the old term android where it wasn't previously used in Star Trek. But outside of being artificially created, there would be little to associate them with, say, the simps who hacked and attacked Mars. They would be much more like augments, which would bring the Sung family full circle from Arik to Autan. Perhaps though these androids being not particularly androidy will be the point. They're railing against organics, most commonly heard before as a Borg term incidentally. But what if they're so organic themselves that the super simps they're inviting to rain death on our galaxy actually include these simps as marked for destruction? The simps we see in the full admonition vision seem to be entirely mechanical, while we're also shown organic things decaying. And even if some parts of Soji and the rest are mechanical, how much is enough to be passed over for annihilation? Will they take a survey to see who was and wasn't built in a lab? Is there a synth one-drop rule? Picard has a mechanical heart, so he could be in with just as much chance of acceptance by the intergalactic synthetic hegemony as Soji. Et in Arcadia Ego Part 1 was refreshing in the sense that it gave us a new location, even if it amounted to a Mediterranean holiday village of people painted gold. One feels that an opportunity was missed to do something truly unusual with a planet of androids, but credit has to go to the soundtrack for picking up some of that slack, as its motif for the town mixes a Middle Eastern sounding woodwind with occasional, synth bubbling up, giving an unsettling feeling which represents the mix of the ostensibly human setting with android inhabitants, and conveys it much better than anything visually. This episode also has the advantage over last week that for all the frustrations it might provide, at least it wasn't boring. It was good to see Brent Spiner again and to get a lot more of the puzzle revealed, though as ever there's more questions that are raised than answers. We're reliant on the next episode to see if everything will hold together. There's a lot of weird stuff and loose ends to tie up so we can judge Star Trek Picard as a whole. The worry is that they won't and will be left on a cliffhanger to wait for the continuation in Series 2. After 10 slow episodes which didn't really have enough story to fill them, I'd feel cheated to have to wait a year to get answers. As such, it feels depressingly likely that that's just what will happen. The other worry is that they might kill Picard. His brain disorder has been raised in this episode, and taken together with the title, it does seem to provide evidence that maybe he's not going to make it. There are, as ever, many plot conveniences and lapses in logic, but perhaps the biggest letdown of the episode is their getting to the artifact on foot when it's so in the distance that it's not visible. Getting on board and finding who they want on this vast structure immediately, and then getting back and some way in the other direction to get to the synth town. This should have taken a matter of days, it seems to me, when they only have a couple until the Romulans arrive, and we don't even see day turn into night over the course of the episode, though maybe we can dismiss that as the planet not rotating. This episode, like all the others of the show really, is full of niggles like that, but this one really stood out for being so unconcealed and blatant. The lesser issue that occurred to me is that rather than a whole colony looking like Soji, Sutra is the only one like her we see, widening the coincidence that it was Sutra's twin Jana who Rios encountered on the Ibn Majid. What's more, of all the androids, it's Sutra who's read up on Vulcans and can somehow do a mind meld. Though to be honest, with the amount of logical flubs this show's been through, who can care about ones as slight as these at this point? Still, I can't say I'm not interested to see next week's episode. How will an intergalactic power who cleanses entire galaxies of organic life be defeated? We'd need the Borg and the Jem'Hadar to lend a hand with this one, you would think. Maybe the artifact being switched on has alerted the Borg and they'll be along to help. Or maybe Geordi will just send the simps a virus. Thank you for listening. Do please like and share if you've enjoyed it, and if you're willing to hear from me again, I'd be honoured if you'd subscribe. I will be back next week with my review and analysis of the final episode of Star Trek Picard Series 1. In the meantime, links to the social media are below, including the Discord server if you'd like to swing by for a chat. This is Jonathan from Headhunters Media, and I hope I'll catch you again soon.